When a mechanic bought a defaulted storage unit in 2006, he was hoping to find spare parts. Instead, he found a dust-covered Volkswagen Beetle that hadn't been seen in 11 years. The car belonged to Hana Sasaki, a college student who went missing in 1995. This discovery wasn't just a break in a cold case, it was the first thread in a carefully constructed lie that had been hiding in plain sight for over a decade. The metallic screech of the storage unit door rolling up was the only sound cutting through the monotonous chant of the auctioneer on a cold October morning in 2006. Jarek Olis stood near the back of the small crowd, breath misting in the frigid air, the collar of his worn canvas jacket turned up against the bite of the Ohio wind. He wasn't here for forgotten furniture or boxes of old clothes. He was hunting for metal, for the scent of oil and possibility. The auctioneer, a stout man named Barry, was working his way down the row of defaulted units at the U-Store-It facility on the industrial outskirts of Columbus. Jarek's restoration garage, Olis Vintage, was struggling. Specializing in classic European imports, particularly Volkswagens, meant high overhead and clients who were often long on passion but short on cash. Auctions like this were a gamble, but sometimes, hidden among the detritus of other people's lives, you found a forgotten transmission, a rare set of rims, or, if the legends were true, an entire car. They reached Unit 418. Barry cut the heavy padlock with bolt cutters, the snap echoing sharply. The corrugated door was shoved upward, revealing the dark interior. Jarek squinted, leaning forward as the crowd surged slightly. The unit was packed tightly. He saw the dull sheen of a cheap laminate dresser, stacks of unlabeled cardboard boxes, and a rolled-up carpet smelling strongly of mildew. It looked unremarkable, a collection of junk likely not worth the gas to haul it away. The bidding started low. $50. A few half-hearted raises pushed it to $100. Jarek hesitated, his gloved hand tightening on the small wad of cash in his pocket, his last reserves for the month. But something caught his eye near the back of the unit. A shape, bulky and indistinct under a heavy, dust-caked canvas tarp. It was too large for furniture, too defined for a random pile. It had the distinct, rounded silhouette he knew intimately. $150, Jarek called out, his voice sounding louder than he intended. A competing bidder, a reseller known for his flea market stalls, glanced back and raised it to $200. Jarek didn't hesitate. $300. The reseller frowned, calculating the effort versus the reward, and shook his head. Barry pointed at Jarek. Sold! Unit 418 to the young man in the back. The crowd moved on to the next unit, leaving Jarek alone with his gamble. He signed the paperwork with Barry, handed over the cash, and affixed his own padlock to the door. He needed his truck and a clear head before diving in. An hour later, Jarek returned. The facility was quiet now, the excitement over. He unlocked Unit 418 and pulled the door up. The silence inside the 10-by-20 space felt heavy. He began the laborious process of clearing a path, dragging the mildewed carpet and the lighter boxes out into the aisle. The air inside was stale, thick with the smell of dust, decay, and time. Finally, he reached the tarp-covered object. It took up nearly half the unit. He stood before it, anticipation tightening his chest. This was the moment of truth. He grabbed a corner of the stiff canvas and pulled hard. The tarp resisted, clinging to the shape beneath, before finally peeling back with a tearing sound. Dust motes danced in the beam of his flashlight. Jarek stopped breathing for a moment. It was a Volkswagen Beetle. Not just any Beetle, but a vintage model, likely late 60s or early 70s. The paint under the thick grime was a striking turquoise, oxidized and showing spots of rust bubbling up on the fenders and the hood, but the body was remarkably intact. The tires were flat, pancaked under the weight of the car, and the chrome bumpers were dull. The driver's side door was slightly ajar. He walked around it slowly, running a hand over the curved roof. It hadn't been wrecked or haphazardly dumped. It had been parked, deliberately covered, and left. for a very long time. Excitement surged through him. A find like this could save his garage. Even if the engine was seized, the parts alone were worth thousands. He needed to start the title process immediately. He crouched down near the front windshield, scraping away the dust to find the vehicle identification number plate on the dashboard. He carefully copied the sequence of numbers into his notepad. Jarek walked back to the facility office, his boots crunching on the gravel. He had a contact, Darlene, who worked at the Ohio BMV. He often called her to run checks on potential restoration projects, making sure they weren't stolen before he invested time and money. He dialed her number. "Darlene, it's Jarek Olis." "How are you doing?" "Jarek, honey, I'm freezing and the coffee machine is broken. What do you need?" "I need you to run a VIN for me. Just bought a storage unit, found a classic Beetle." He read the numbers to her. "All right, hold on." "Let me pull it up." Jarek heard the clicking of keys. A minute passed, then another. The silence on the other end started to feel strange. "Darlene? Everything okay?" When she spoke again, her voice was different, lower, urgent. "Jarek, where did you find this car?" "Storage auction, Unit 418. You store it on Commerce Drive." "Why?" "This car, it's not listed as stolen, but it's flagged, heavily flagged in the national database." "Flagged for what?" "It's linked to a missing person case, high profile, from back in the 90s. Hana Sasaki." Darlene paused. "Jarek, the instructions on this flag are very specific. The BCI Cold Case Unit is to be notified immediately." The excitement curdled in Jarek's stomach, replaced by a sudden chilling dread. This wasn't a forgotten relic. It was evidence. "Don't touch anything," Darlene warned him. "Don't move the car. Don't even close the unit door. The police are going to be contacting you very soon." Jarek hung up the phone and walked slowly back to Unit 418. The turquoise Beetle seemed different now. The oxidized paint looked less like patina and more like neglect. The dark interior, visible through the dusty windows, felt ominous. He stood in the cold aisle, staring at the car, waiting for the sound of sirens. Detective Elias Vance was trying to calculate the optimal time to start drawing his pension, but the drone of the financial planner at the front of the conference room was making it impossible to focus. It was October 2006, and Elias was enduring a mandatory pre-retirement seminar, a bureaucratic ritual marking the final stretch of his 30-year career. He was only months away from the end, and frankly, he couldn't wait. He was tired of the paperwork, the politics, and the endless parade of human misery. He had spent the last decade in the Bureau of Criminal Investigation's Cold Case Unit, a place where hope went to die slowly, buried under mountains of dusty files and degraded evidence. It was supposed to be less stressful than homicide, but Elias found the silence of the unsolved cases louder than the chaos of fresh crime scenes. The financial planner clicked to a slide titled "Maximizing Your Deferred Compensation," and Elias felt his eyelids growing heavy. Just as he was about to surrender to the inevitable, the pager clipped to his belt vibrated violently against his hip. He frowned. He rarely got paged anymore. He excused himself quietly and stepped out into the sterile hallway of the BCI headquarters. He dialed the number on the small screen. "Dispatch, this is Detective Vance." "Detective, we have a priority notification from the Columbus BMV. A vehicle flagged in connection to one of your cases has been located at a storage facility." "Okay," Elias said, pulling out his notepad. "Which case?" The dispatcher read the name. "Sasaki, Hana, case number 95-00834. Elias froze. The name hit him like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of him. Hana Sasaki. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in years, but it echoed in his mind constantly. "Detective? Are you still there?" "Yeah," Elias managed, his voice rough. "I'm here. Give me the location." He hung up the phone, his mind reeling. The retirement seminar was forgotten. He walked quickly to his desk in the cold case unit, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. Hana Sasaki wasn't just another case. It was the case, the one that broke him, the one that kept him up at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what he missed. In 1995, Elias was a rising star in the Columbus Homicide Division. He was the lead detective assigned to Hana's disappearance. She was a brilliant architecture student at Ohio State University, 21 years old, with a future as bright as a supernova. And then, one Tuesday night in October, she vanished. He remembered the details vividly. She was last seen leaving the university's design studio late at night, packing up her intricate models and blueprints. Her classmates saw her head toward the student parking lot. She was supposed to drive back to her off-campus apartment, a short 10-minute trip. She never arrived. When she missed a major presentation the next day, her friends reported her missing. The investigation was massive. Elias and his team turned the city upside down. They searched the route she would have taken, dredged the Olentangy River, interviewed everyone who knew her. There were no signs of trouble in her life, no disgruntled boyfriends, no academic rivals. It was as if the night had simply swallowed her whole. The public assumption, the one Elias eventually had to accept, was a random abduction, a tragic case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But her car, the vintage turquoise VW Beetle she adored, was never found either. That always bothered him. Abductors usually dumped the car. They didn't make it disappear along with the victim. Now, 11 years later, it had reappeared. Elias went to the archives, the climate-controlled basement where the physical evidence of unsolved cases was stored. He navigated the rows of metal shelving until he found the section dedicated to 1995. He located the boxes labeled Sasaki, H, and pulled the primary case file. He carried it back to his desk and opened it. On top was her university ID photo, a young woman with dark, shoulder-length hair wearing a pink sweater with a large green H on it, smiling brightly. The image always twisted something inside him. He remembered meeting her parents, their faces ravaged by grief, begging him to find their daughter. He had promised them he would, a promise he failed to keep. He flipped through the reports, the witness statements, the timelines. It all felt so familiar, yet so distant. He had spent years agonizing over these pages, searching for a clue, a hint, anything he might have overlooked. He stood up, grabbing his coat. He walked to his captain's office and knocked on the door. "Elias?" "I thought you were in the retirement seminar," Captain Mendoza said, looking up from a stack of budget reports. "Hana Sasaki's car has been found," Elias said simply. Mendoza paused, the significance of the statement hitting him. He had been Elias's partner back in '95. He knew what this case meant to him. "Where?" "Storage facility on Commerce Drive, found during an auction." "I'll assign a team." "No," Elias interrupted. "This is my case. I'm taking the lead." It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact. Mendoza looked at him for a long moment, seeing the weariness in his eyes replaced by a familiar, hardened resolve. "Okay, Elias. Keep me updated, and be careful. Ghosts have a way of haunting the living." Elias nodded and walked out. He got into his unmarked sedan and headed toward Commerce Drive. 11 years was a long time, but as he drove, the years seemed to melt away. He was back in the hunt, chasing the ghost that had defined his career. The U-Store-It facility was exactly the kind of place Elias despised. Anonymous, industrial, a repository for things people wanted to hide or forget. He pulled up to the main office, flashing his badge at the local patrol officer who had secured the scene. "Where is it?" Elias asked. "Row D, Unit 418, the officer replied. "The guy who found it is waiting for you." "Seems pretty shaken up." Elias walked down the row of identical metal doors until he reached 418. The door was open, revealing the cluttered interior. And there, dominating the space, was the turquoise Beetle. The sight of it hit him harder than he expected. It was like seeing a ghost materialized in front of him. He had stared at photos of this car for countless hours, memorized every detail. Now here it was, covered in dust, rusted, but undeniably Hannah's car. A young man was leaning against the adjacent unit, nervously talking to another officer. He looked to be in his mid-20s, wearing a canvas jacket and grease-stained jeans. This must be the buyer. Elias approached him. "Mr. Olis?" The young man turned, his eyes wide and anxious. "Yeah, Jarek Olis. Are you the detective?" "Detective Elias Vance, BCI Cold Case Unit." He gestured toward the unit. "You bought this at auction today?" "Yeah, blind bid. I restore vintage Volkswagens. I saw the shape under the tarp and took a gamble." Jarek ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't know. I just called the BMV to run the VIN, and the next thing I know, they're telling me it's linked to a missing person." "You did the right thing, Mr. Olis." Elias turned his attention to the car. He walked slowly around it, taking it in. The forensic team hadn't arrived yet, so he was careful not to touch anything. The car confirmed his initial gut feeling from years ago. It wasn't wrecked. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken windows, no damage consistent with an accident or a forced entry. It had been parked, carefully positioned, and covered. This wasn't a random abduction. It was calculated. "You said you restore these cars?" Elias asked Jarek, who was hovering nearby. "Yeah, specialized in them for years. My garage is just down the road." "What do you see when you look at this?" Jarek hesitated, then stepped closer, pointing without touching. "Well, first off, it's been sitting here for a very long time. The way the tires are flattened, the specific pressure points, that indicates years of stationary weight. And the rust patterns, they're consistent with long-term exposure to damp, stagnant air like you'd find in a storage unit." He opened the driver's side door, which was slightly ajar, using a pen to push it wider. He peered inside. The interior is surprisingly clean, considering the exterior condition. Dusty, but no trash, no obvious signs of someone living in it. He pointed toward the engine compartment at the rear. "I can't open it without tools, but I'd bet the battery is disconnected." "Why do you say that?" Elias asked. "If you're storing a car long-term, you disconnect the battery to prevent it from draining and corroding the terminals. Whoever parked this intended for it to sit undisturbed for a very long time. They weren't just hiding it for a few days, they were erasing it." Elias nodded slowly. Jarek's observations confirmed his own assessment. This was a meticulously planned disappearance. The forensic team arrived, their van pulling up to the unit. Elias stepped back, allowing them to begin their work. They started by photographing the car in situ, documenting every angle, every detail. "I want this processed thoroughly," Elias told the lead forensic technician, a woman named Dr. Lena Hansen, whom he had worked with on numerous cases. "Every fiber, every print, every speck of dust." "We'll do our best, Elias," she replied. "But 11 years in a non-climate-controlled environment, don't expect miracles." Elias knew she was right, but he had to hope. This was the first piece of physical evidence to surface in over a decade. It had to mean something. He coordinated the logistics of moving the car. It couldn't be driven. It needed to be flatbedded to the secure state impound garage, where it could be processed in a controlled environment. As the tow truck arrived, Elias looked at Jarek, who was watching the proceedings with a mixture of fascination and regret. "Mr. Olis, I'm going to need a formal statement from you," Elias said. "And I appreciate your cooperation. You've been very helpful." Jarek nodded. "I just hope you find out what happened to her. It feels wrong somehow, finding her car like this." Elias watched as the turquoise Beetle was carefully loaded onto the flatbed. The ghost case was alive again, and this time he wasn't going to let it go cold. The initial excitement of the discovery quickly gave way to the grinding reality of the investigation. Elias knew that the key to understanding why the car was hidden lay in the storage unit itself. Who rented it? And why now, after 11 years, did it suddenly reappear? He started with the storage facility manager, a man named Leonard Sykes, who was nervously chain-smoking outside the office. Sykes was understandably distressed by the police presence and the realization that his facility had been harboring evidence in a missing person case for over a decade. "I need the rental records for Unit 418, Elias said, sitting across from Sykes in the cramped, cluttered office. Sykes nodded nervously and pulled a dusty ledger book from a filing cabinet. "We computerized a few years ago, but the older records are still in here." He flipped through the pages until he found the entry for Unit 418. Here it is, rented on October 28, 1995. Elias felt a chill. That was just 3 days after Hannah disappeared. The timeline was tight. Whoever took her moved quickly to hide the car. Who rented it? "Name listed is Robert Foster," Sykes said, squinting at the faded handwriting. Elias already knew the name was likely an alias, but he had to follow the procedure. He ran the name through the system. As expected, there was no record of a Robert Foster matching the description or the address provided on the rental agreement. The address was a vacant lot in a rundown part of town. How was it paid for? Elias asked. This was the crucial question. Sykes examined the ledger, his finger tracing the entries. Cash, prepaid for 10 years. Elias stared at him. 10 years? Prepaid? In cash? Yeah, it was unusual, even back then. Most people pay monthly or yearly, but if the cash is good, we don't ask too many questions. Elias leaned back in his chair, the implications sinking in. A 10-year prepaid lease, in cash, under a fake name. This explained why the car remained hidden for so long. It was untraceable. No credit card statements, no checks, no ongoing contact with the facility. The perpetrator had bought a decade of invisibility. Why did it go up for auction now? Elias asked. If the lease was for 10 years, it would have expired last year, in 2005. Sykes nodded. That's right. When the prepaid lease expired, the account automatically switched to monthly billing. We sent notices to the address on file, but they were returned as undeliverable. We tried contacting the phone number listed, but it was disconnected. So the payments stopped? Exactly. After 6 months of non-payment, the unit went into default. We followed the legal procedure for auctioning off the contents. We had no idea what was inside. We assumed Robert Foster had died or moved away. Elias realized the perpetrator hadn't slipped up. The system had simply outlasted their plan. They had assumed 10 years was long enough for the case to be forgotten, for the trail to go completely cold. They hadn't counted on the automated billing system and the eventual auction. Elias returned to the storage unit. The car was gone, but the remaining contents were still there. He had the forensic team process the unit itself, searching for any trace evidence that might identify the renter. They found nothing. The boxes contained generic household items, old clothes, cheap dishes, worthless knickknacks. The furniture was cheap and unremarkable. It was all filler, camouflage designed to make the unit look like any other forgotten storage space. Elias stood in the empty unit, the scent of dust and decay still lingering in the air. The perpetrator was smart, patient, and meticulous. They had erased Hana Sasaki from the world and almost got away with it. The dead-end trail left Elias frustrated and increasingly uneasy. The discovery of the car had reopened the case, but it hadn't provided any new leads. It simply confirmed what he already suspected. Hana was the victim of a targeted, premeditated crime. He returned to BCI headquarters, the weight of the case settling back onto his shoulders. He had a ghost car and a fake name. It wasn't much to go on. He needed a break, a crack in the facade. He needed something the perpetrator hadn't anticipated. The turquoise Beetle was transported to the State Crime Lab's secure impound garage, a large, sterile facility smelling of chemicals and ozone. Elias oversaw the processing, pushing the forensic team for rush results. He knew that whatever secrets the car held, they were buried under 11 years of dust and neglect. The processing was meticulous and time-consuming. The exterior was examined first, photographed under different lighting conditions to reveal any hidden scratches or markings. The rust spots were analyzed to determine the rate of corrosion. The tires were removed and examined for trace evidence. Then they moved to the interior. The car was divided into grids, and each section was vacuumed, the contents meticulously catalogued. The upholstery was examined for fibers, hair, and DNA. The dashboard, the steering wheel, the gear shift. Every surface was swabbed and tested for fingerprints. Elias watched the process unfold, hovering over the technicians, desperate for any scrap of information. He felt a growing sense of urgency. His retirement was looming, and he couldn't bear the thought of leaving this case unsolved again. The results started coming in, and they were frustratingly negative. The car appeared to have been wiped clean before storage. There were no useful fingerprints, only smudged partials that were unidentifiable. No blood, no DNA other than Hannah's own. The hair and fibers found in the interior were consistent with Hannah and her immediate circle of friends, who had been in the car frequently. The standard search confirmed the glove compartment and trunk were empty of any personal belongings or evidence. It was as if the car had been professionally sanitized before being sealed away. Elias felt the familiar dread creeping back in. The initial hope sparked by the discovery was rapidly fading. The case was threatening to go cold again, this time for good. The pressure from the bureaucracy started mounting. Captain Mendoza called him into his office. The budget reports spread across his desk. "Elias, I know this case means a lot to you," Mendoza said, his tone measured. "But we have limited resources. We've expended a significant amount of manpower and lab time on this vehicle recovery, and so far we have nothing to show for it." "We have the car," Elias insisted. "That proves the disappearance wasn't a random abduction." "It was planned." "We suspected that already. But we don't have any new leads, any suspects. We can't justify keeping this level of resource allocation open indefinitely." Elias knew he was right, but he couldn't accept it. "Just give me a little more time." "There has to be something we missed." Mendoza sighed. "Elias, we've been over the case file 1,000 times. We interviewed everyone. We checked every lead. If there was something there, we would have found it 11 years ago." Elias left the office feeling defeated and desperate. He walked back to the impound garage, the sterile environment mirroring the coldness of the case. The turquoise Beetle sat in the center of the room, stripped of its secrets, mocking him with its silence. He stared at the car, the vibrant color muted under the harsh fluorescent lights. He thought about Hannah, her bright smile, her promising future extinguished in a moment of violence. He couldn't let her down again. He needed a new perspective, a fresh set of eyes. He needed someone who saw this car not just as evidence, but as a machine, a puzzle, a piece of history. He thought about the young mechanic who found it, Jarek Olis. He remembered Jarek's specialized knowledge, his intuitive understanding of the vehicle. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot he had left. He decided to give Jarek a call. Jarek Olis couldn't get the turquoise Beetle out of his mind. It wasn't just the financial loss, although that stung. It was the car itself, the history it represented, the tragic story attached to it. He felt a strange connection to the missing owner, Hannah Sasaki. He had seen her photo in the news reports that followed the discovery. She was young, vibrant, full of life, and she loved this car. He found himself obsessing over the details of the case, reading old news articles online, searching for any information about Hannah's disappearance. The more he learned, the more invested he became. He felt a growing sense of injustice, a need to understand what happened to her. His garage, Olis Vintage, felt empty and quiet in the days following the auction. He tried to focus on the other restoration projects he had lined up, but his mind kept wandering back to the Beetle. He kept thinking about the way it was stored, the the disconnected battery, the specific rust patterns. He knew these cars intimately, their quirks, their hidden spaces, the places where things could be lost or hidden. He wondered if the police had missed something. They were thorough, meticulous, but they saw the car as a crime scene, not as a machine. They didn't know the intricacies of vintage Volkswagens, the way the panels fit together, the voids behind the dashboard, the cavities in the chassis. He had an itch, a mechanic's intuition that there was something more to be found. He knew it was a long shot, but he couldn't shake the feeling. He decided to contact Detective Vance. He still had the detective's card. He picked up the phone and dialed the number, his heart pounding nervously. "Detective Vance, this is Jarek Olis, the mechanic who found the car." Elias sounded tired on the other end. "Mr. Olis, what can I do for you?" "I know this might sound strange," Jarek started, hesitant, "but I can't stop thinking about that car. I specialize in vintage Volkswagens. I know them inside and out." "We appreciate your expertise, Mr. Olis. The forensic team has completed their processing." "I understand that, but they look for evidence. I look for things that don't belong. I know the hidden spaces in these cars, the places where standard police procedures might not reach." Elias was silent for a moment. Jarek could hear the skepticism in his silence. "Mr. Olis, the car has been thoroughly searched. We found nothing." "But you didn't disassemble it, did you?" Jarek persisted. "You didn't take apart the dashboard, the heater channels, the rear seat assembly?" "There are voids in these cars, places where things can be hidden intentionally." Elias considered this. He was desperate for a lead, any lead, and Jarek's specialized knowledge was undeniable. He had already proven helpful at the storage unit. "What are you proposing?" Elias asked. "Let me examine the car. Supervised, of course, at the impound lot. Let me do a deep inspection, a restoration assessment. If there's anything there, I'll find it." Elias weighed the risks. It was unconventional, allowing a civilian access to evidence in an active investigation. But the investigation was stalled, and Jarek was the one who found the car in the first place. "Okay, Mr. Olis," Elias said finally. "I'll clear it with my superiors. You can have access to the car under my supervision, but you touch nothing without my authorization." Jarek felt a surge of adrenaline. "Thank you, Detective. You won't regret this." The next day, Jarek arrived at the state impound garage, his tool bag slung over his shoulder. The facility was intimidating, sterile, and cold. Elias met him at the entrance and led him to the examination bay where the turquoise Beetle was parked. "The rules are simple," Elias said, his tone serious. "You look, you assess, but you don't disturb anything without my permission. If you find something, you stop immediately and alert me." Jarek nodded, his eyes fixed on the car. "Understood." He began his inspection, his approach fundamentally different from the forensic team's. He wasn't looking for fingerprints or DNA. He was looking for anomalies, inconsistencies, things that didn't fit the car's natural state. He started with the exterior, checking the chassis integrity, the wiring harnesses, the fuel lines. He examined the engine compartment, confirming his suspicion that the battery had been disconnected. Then he moved to the interior. He examined the seat upholstery, the door panels, the headliner. He checked the heater channels running along the floor, a common hiding spot in Beetles. He worked methodically, his hands moving over the surfaces with a practiced ease. Elias watched him closely, impressed by his focus and attention to detail. Jarek spent hours examining the car, his frustration growing. He wasn't finding anything. The car was clean, eerily so. It was as if it had been stripped of its soul. He was about to give up, to admit defeat, when he turned his attention to the dashboard. The dashboard of a vintage Beetle was a complex assembly. It wasn't just a flat surface with gauges. It was a structural component, a maze of wires, vents, and metal supports. Jarek knew this area intimately. He had restored dozens of them, tracing electrical faults, replacing rusted components, navigating the tight spaces behind the facade. He focused on the glove box. The police had checked it, of course, found it empty. But Jarek wasn't interested in the glove box itself. He was interested in the cavity behind it. The glove box assembly in this model was notoriously tricky to remove. It was held in place by a series of hidden screws and clips, accessible only by contorting oneself under the dashboard. It was a space no one would normally look, a place forensics would ignore unless they had a specific reason to disassemble it. "I want to remove the glove box assembly," Jarek told Elias, who was leaning against the wall, watching him work. Elias raised an eyebrow. The glove box was empty. Not the box itself, the space behind it. There's a cavity between the assembly and the firewall. It's a tight fit, but it's accessible if you know how. Elias considered it. It was a destructive process, potentially damaging evidence, but the car had already been processed, and they had nothing to lose. "Okay," Elias said. "Proceed carefully." Jarek nodded and retrieved his tools. He started the complex process of disassembly. He lay on his back on the cold concrete floor, his head under the dashboard, a flashlight clenched between his teeth. He worked slowly, meticulously, removing the screws and clips that held the assembly in place. It was grueling work. The screws were rusted, the metal sharp, the space cramped. He struggled with the vintage assembly, his knuckles scraping against the metal supports. Finally, after nearly an hour of painstaking work, the assembly came loose. He carefully pulled the housing unit free, revealing the dark cavity behind it. He shone his flashlight into the void. It was mostly empty, dusty, lined with wires and insulation. But then he saw it. Something was wedged deep in the cavity, jammed against the firewall. It was not part of the car. His heart leaped into his throat. He stopped moving, staring at the object. It was a cylinder shape, wrapped in what looked like paper. "I found something," Jarek said, his voice muffled under the dashboard. Elias was instantly alert. "What is it?" "I don't know. Looks like rolled-up papers." "Don't touch it," Elias ordered. He crouched down, peering into the cavity. He could see the object, tucked away in the deepest recess. "Can you reach it?" "I think so," Jarek said. "It's tight." He reached into the cavity, his fingers brushing against the brittle paper. It was jammed tightly. He had to be careful not to damage it. He maneuvered his hand, trying to get a grip on the cylinder. Slowly, carefully, he extracted the object. It was a tightly rolled cylinder of large documents, about 2 feet long. The paper was yellowed and brittle with age. Jarek emerged from under the dashboard, the cylinder clutched in his hand. His hands were shaking. He looked at Elias, his eyes wide with anticipation. They were architectural blueprints. He could see the intricate lines and markings, the technical specifications. He recognized them immediately as the kind of designs architecture students produced. He knew instinctively that these were Hana's, and that they were the key to everything. "Detective," Jarek said, his voice trembling, "you need to see this." He handed the blueprints to Elias. The detective took them carefully, his expression hardening. He knew, as Jarek did, that this was the break they had been waiting for, the one that changed everything. Elias rushed to the examination table, Jarek close behind him. He felt a surge of adrenaline, the familiar rush of the hunt returning. This was it, the first real lead in 11 years. He looked at Jarek. "How did you know to look there?" Jarek shrugged, wiping the grease from his hands with a rag. "It's a known hiding spot in these models. Tight, inaccessible, easy to overlook. If you wanted to hide something where no one would find it, that's where you'd put it." Elias nodded, impressed. Jarek's specialized expertise had paid off. No one else would have found this. They carefully unrolled the blueprints on the clean examination table. The paper was brittle, cracking slightly as they flattened it. They used evidence weights to hold the corners down. They were architectural designs, detailed and intricate. A large skyscraper with a unique, twisting structure. The designs were stunning, revolutionary even to Elias's untrained eye. He looked at the title block in the bottom right corner. The name was there, Hana Sasaki. "These are her designs," Elias said, his voice hushed. "Her senior thesis project, maybe?" They examined the sheets, page after page of detailed drawings, structural calculations, material specifications. Hana's talent was undeniable. "She was good," Jarek said, admiring the complexity of the designs. "Really good." Elias was focused on the content, searching for anything that might explain why these blueprints were hidden away in the car. They seemed to be just architectural drawings, nothing incriminating. He reached the last sheet. It was a perspective drawing of the skyscraper, rendered in charcoal. It was beautiful and haunting. He turned the sheet over, and there it was. On the back, scrawled in Hana's handwriting, was a brief note. It was written hastily, the letters slanted and uneven. "Evidence confirmed. Meeting Professor Croft, 10 p.m., the site. Final confrontation." Elias stared at the words, the blood draining from his face. The case broke wide open in that moment. "Professor Croft?" he whispered. This was the first direct evidence linking Hana's disappearance to another person, and it wasn't just anyone. It was her professor. Evidence confirmed. Final confrontation. The words suggested a serious adversarial conflict. Hana wasn't meeting her professor for a friendly chat. She was confronting him with something incriminating. Elias looked at the blueprints again. Evidence confirmed. What evidence? What had she discovered? He thought about the designs, the brilliance of them, and then he thought about the timeline. 1995, the year Hana disappeared. He needed to know who Professor Croft was and what he had been working on back then. He rushed back to his desk, Jarek following him, caught up in the momentum of the discovery. He logged into the university's database, searching for faculty members in the architecture department in 1995. He found the name quickly, Dr. Julian Croft. He was Hana's mentor and thesis advisor. Elias remembered interviewing him back in '95. Croft had been devastated by Hana's disappearance, praising her talent, cooperating fully with the investigation. Elias had dismissed him as a suspect early on. He had an airtight alibi, a faculty dinner, then home. But now, looking at the note, Elias realized how wrong he had been. He needed to know what happened to Julian Croft in the 11 years since Hana vanished. He typed the name into a search engine. The results stunned him. Julian Croft was no longer an obscure university professor. He was a star, a starchitect, one of the most prominent architects in the Midwest. His firm designed major landmarks across Ohio, winning international acclaim. Elias clicked on the images. Croft was charismatic, wealthy, frequently quoted in magazines. He was known for his philanthropy, his speeches about mentoring young talent. He was a powerful, well-connected public figure. The stakes escalated dramatically. Elias realized he wasn't investigating a random abduction or a crime of passion. He was investigating a conspiracy, a cover-up that reached the highest levels of society. He looked at the blueprints spread across his desk, the evidence that Hana had confirmed, the evidence that Julian Croft had killed to protect. He realized the investigation was just beginning, and it was going to be a war. The revelation that Julian Croft was involved in Hana's disappearance changed the entire dynamic of the investigation. Elias was no longer chasing shadows. He had a target, a powerful, influential target. He needed to understand the man behind the facade. He started digging into Julian Croft's life, his career, his reputation. The portrait that emerged was intimidating. Croft was a celebrated figure in Columbus, a local hero who had risen from humble beginnings to international acclaim. His designs were iconic, transforming the city's skyline. He was a philanthropist, donating generously to the university, the arts, and various charities. He was a mentor, nurturing young talent, inspiring the next generation of architects. He was untouchable. Elias looked at the photos of Croft, the charismatic smile, the tailored suits, the confident posture. He seemed like the epitome of success and integrity. But Elias knew the truth. He knew the darkness lurking beneath the surface. He needed to find the connection between Hana's blueprints and Croft's success. He needed to understand the motive. He started researching Croft's career trajectory. His rise to fame began shortly after Hana's disappearance. In 1996, he unveiled the design for the Aegis Tower, a revolutionary skyscraper that won international acclaim and launched his career into the stratosphere. The Aegis Tower. Elias knew the building well. It was the centerpiece of the Columbus skyline, a twisting structure of glass and steel that seemed to defy gravity. He looked at Hana's blueprints again. The twisting structure, the innovative design. He felt a chill spreading through him. He had a hunch, a terrible suspicion. He needed an expert opinion, someone who could analyze the designs, compare them, and confirm his suspicion. He couldn't use anyone connected to the university or the local architecture community. Croft's influence was too pervasive. He needed an outsider, someone impartial and authoritative. He found Dr. Eris Thorne, a respected forensic architect and historian based in Chicago. Dr. Thorne specialized in cases of intellectual property theft in architecture. Elias contacted him, explaining the situation discreetly. He didn't mention Croft's name, only that he was investigating a cold case involving a missing architecture student and a potential stolen design. Dr. Thorne agreed to consult on the case. Elias digitized Hana's blueprints and sent them to him, along with the published designs for the Aegis Tower. He waited anxiously for Dr. Thorne's analysis. This was the linchpin of the case. If he could prove that Croft stole Hana's designs, he had a motive for murder. A few days later, Dr. Thorne called him. "Detective Vance," he said, his voice serious, "I've analyzed the designs. And I have to tell you, I'm stunned." "What did you find?" Elias asked, his heart pounding. "The designs by Hana Sasaki, they are revolutionary, truly groundbreaking for their time. The structural innovations, the aesthetic signature, they are years ahead of anything else being produced in the mid-90s. He paused. "And the Aegis Tower, it's a direct copy." Elias closed his eyes, the confirmation hitting him like a physical blow. The core concepts, the engineering solutions, the entire design language, they are identical to Hana Sasaki's blueprints. There is no doubt whatsoever. Hana Sasaki designed the Aegis Tower. And the published designs attributed to the other architect? They are derivative, refinements of Hana's original concept, but the genius, the spark of innovation, it all belongs to her. Elias thanked Dr. Thorne and hung up the phone. He now had the motive. Julian Croft had stolen his student's work, built his entire career on her genius, and when she discovered the theft, when she confronted him with the evidence, he silenced her, permanently. The realization was staggering, the scale of the deception, the audacity of the crime. Julian Croft wasn't just a murderer, he was a fraud. His entire life was a lie. Elias looked at the photo of the Aegis Tower on his computer screen. The gleaming monument to Croft's success was actually a tombstone, a constant reminder of the brilliance he had extinguished. The challenge now was to prove it, to dismantle the empire Croft had built and to expose the monster lurking behind the mask of the starchitect. Armed with Dr. Thorne's analysis, Elias now had a clear understanding of the motive. The stolen legacy of Hana Sasaki was the foundation upon which Julian Croft had built his empire. But motive alone wasn't enough to secure a conviction. He needed evidence, concrete proof that Croft was responsible for Hana's disappearance. He started by revisiting the original investigation, looking for any inconsistencies or overlooked details related to Croft. He pulled Croft's 1995 alibi, the faculty dinner, then home. It seemed airtight at the time, but now, knowing what he knew, Elias saw the cracks. The faculty dinner ended at 9 p.m. Hana was last seen leaving the design studio around 9:30 p.m. The note mentioned a meeting at 10 p.m. The timeline fit. He needed to break the alibi. He started tracking down the attendees of the faculty dinner 11 years later. Most were still connected to the university, hesitant to speak ill of their esteemed colleague. He finally found one professor, Dr. Evelyn Reed, who had retired and moved to Florida. She remembered the dinner well. Julian was agitated that night, she recalled over the phone. He kept checking his watch, seemed distracted. He left immediately after the dinner, didn't stay for drinks or conversation. Did he say where he was going? Elias asked. No, just that he had an urgent matter to attend to. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It established that Croft had the opportunity to meet Hana that night. Next, Elias focused on the location mentioned in the note, the site. He needed to identify where Hana met Croft. He pulled the property records and construction permits for every project Julian Croft was associated with in October 1995. There were several possibilities, but one stood out. The Aegis Tower construction zone. It was the very building based on Hana's stolen designs. It made perfect sense that Croft would lure her there under the guise of reviewing the project, perhaps offering her a role in the construction, a chance to see her vision realized. He checked the construction timeline. Groundbreaking and the pouring of the deep foundation occurred the exact week Hana disappeared. The horrifying realization hit him. If Croft lured her to the active construction site, he had the perfect opportunity to dispose of the body, permanently. He needed more evidence linking Croft to the crime scene. He decided to track down Croft's ex-wife, Clarissa. They had divorced in 2001, and she had moved to Cincinnati. He drove to Cincinnati and found her living in a modest apartment complex. She was hesitant to speak, still intimidated by Croft's influence. "I don't want any trouble," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Julian, he can be very persuasive." Elias appealed to her sense of justice. He told her about Hana, the stolen designs, the hidden car. He showed her the note. Clarissa stared at the handwriting, her eyes filling with tears. "I always wondered," she whispered. "I always suspected something was wrong." "What do you mean?" Elias asked gently. "That night, the night the student disappeared. Julian came home late. Well, after midnight. I was asleep, but he woke me up when he came in. You told the police he was home right after the dinner." "He told me to say that. He said it was important, that he was being targeted by rivals at the university. I was young, naive. I believed him." She paused, taking a shaky breath. He was agitated, nervous. And his clothes, they were covered in mud and fine gray dust, like concrete dust. Elias felt a chill. Concrete dust. The Aegis Tower construction site. What did he do with the clothes? He laundered them immediately. That night. He never did laundry. I always thought it was strange. She looked at Elias, her expression pleading. "I stayed silent out of fear. He threatened me, said he would ruin me if I ever breathed a word." Elias thanked her for her courage. He now had a broken alibi, a motive, and circumstantial evidence linking Croft to the crime scene. It was a strong case, but it was still circumstantial. He needed something more concrete, something undeniable. He needed to find Hana's body, and he had a terrible feeling he knew exactly where it was. The investigation was gaining momentum, but Elias knew he needed to build an airtight case before confronting a man as powerful as Julian Croft. He continued to track down key figures from 1995, searching for any echoes of the past that might resonate in the present. He located Sarah Jenkins, Hana's roommate. She was now a graphic designer living in Cleveland. He drove up to meet her, hoping she might remember something that didn't seem significant at the time. Sarah was still haunted by Hana's disappearance. The memory of her friend, her brilliance, her ambition was still vivid. She was driven, Sarah said, sitting in her living room, a cup of tea clutched in her hands. More driven than anyone I've ever known. She poured everything into her work. Did she talk about her senior thesis project? Elias asked. Constantly. It was her obsession. She was designing this incredible skyscraper, something truly revolutionary. She believed it would change the world. Did she mention Professor Croft? Sarah's expression darkened. Croft. He was her mentor, her advisor. She admired him, trusted him. But in the weeks before she disappeared, something changed. What do you mean? She became anxious, secretive. She stopped talking about her project, started guarding her blueprints, her models. She seemed paranoid almost. Did she say why? She hinted that she felt her ideas were being exploited, that someone was trying to steal her work. She wouldn't say who, but I suspected it was Croft. He was the only one with access to her designs. Did she confront him? I don't know. She was afraid. He was her mentor, the head of the department. Accusing him would be career suicide, but she was also determined to protect her work. She said she was gathering proof. Evidence confirmed, Elias whispered, remembering the note. Sarah nodded. The night she disappeared, she was nervous, but also resolute. She said she was going to settle things once and for all. Sarah's testimony corroborated the narrative Elias was building. Hannah wasn't a victim of a random abduction. She was a threat, a brilliant young woman who dared to challenge a powerful man. Elias returned to Columbus, energized by the progress he was making. He now had a compelling case, a narrative supported by evidence and testimony. He decided it was time to revisit Croft's 1995 alibi, this time armed with the knowledge he had gained. He reviewed the statements from the faculty dinner attendees, the timeline, the inconsistencies. He focused on the gap between the end of the dinner and Croft's return home, nearly 3 hours. Enough time to meet Hannah, kill her, and dispose of the body. He needed to understand the logistics of the Aegis Tower construction site. He obtained the construction logs, the delivery schedules, the personnel records. The logs confirmed that the main support columns in the subterranean levels were poured during the night and early morning after Hannah vanished. The timing was precise. He realized the horrifying efficiency of the plan. Croft lured Hannah to the site, killed her, and buried her body in the wet foundation of a support column. It was the perfect disposal method. No grave to discover, no remains to identify. Hannah was entombed within the very structure built from her genius. The realization left Elias feeling sickened and enraged. The audacity of the crime, the cruelty of the act. He had the motive, the opportunity, the means. He had the stolen designs, the hidden car, the handwritten note, the broken alibi, the circumstantial evidence. It was time to present the case to the district attorney. It was time to bring Julian Croft to justice. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Croft was a powerful man with friends in high places. He would fight back with everything he had. But Elias was ready. He had waited 11 years for this moment, and he wasn't going to back down. Elias presented his findings to the district attorney, a politically ambitious man named Marcus Thorne. He laid out the case meticulously. The discovery of the car, the hidden blueprints, the expert confirmation of the stolen designs, the motive, the handwritten note, the broken alibi, the circumstantial evidence linking Croft to the crime scene. He expected the DA to be impressed, energized by the prospect of prosecuting such a high-profile case. Instead, Thorne leaned back in his chair, his expression skeptical and cautious. "It's a compelling story, Elias," Thorne said, his tone measured. "But it's still circumstantial. We have no murder weapon, no eyewitnesses, no confession, and we have no body." "We have a strong suspicion of where the body is," Elias argued, referring to the Aegis Tower Foundation. "A suspicion based on a hunch and an 11-year-old note. It's not enough to get a warrant to excavate the foundation of a major skyscraper. It's not a hunch. It's a solid case. "It's a case against Julian Croft," Thorne corrected him. "A man who donated millions to this city, who sits on the boards of major corporations, who is personal friends with the mayor and the governor." "He's a murderer," Elias said, his voice rising in frustration. "He's a powerful man, Elias. And accusing him of murder without absolute proof would cause a massive scandal. It would expose the city to lawsuits, damage the economy, and ruin careers, including mine." Elias realized he had hit a wall, the wall of influence that protected Julian Croft. The pushback was immediate. The next day, Croft's high-powered lawyers contacted the police department, subtly threatening defamation lawsuits if the investigation continued. They demanded access to the evidence, claiming Croft was being targeted by a disgruntled detective with a personal vendetta. Captain Mendoza called Elias into his office. His expression was grim. "Elias, I warned you to tread carefully," he said, his voice strained. "The DA is refusing to move forward, and now we have Croft's lawyers breathing down our necks." "We have a solid case," Elias insisted. "We have a circumstantial case against a powerful man, and in this city, that's not enough." Mendoza paused, looking at Elias with a mixture of sympathy and frustration. "You've done everything you could. You found the car, the motive, the evidence, but we can't move forward without the DA's support." "So we just let him get away with it?" Elias asked, his voice trembling with rage. "We need concrete proof, Elias. We need the body. Without it, we have nothing." Elias left the office feeling defeated and desperate. He had underestimated the reach of Croft's influence. He had assumed that the truth would be enough. But he was wrong. He realized that the system was rigged, that justice was not blind, but selective. His retirement was weeks away. If he didn't solve this now, Croft would get away with it forever. He couldn't let that happen. He couldn't let Hannah down again. He realized he had to take matters into his own hands. He had to find a way to get the proof he needed, outside the constraints of the system. He needed to get back into the Aegis Tower. And this time, he wasn't going to ask for permission. The realization that the system was protecting Julian Croft forced Elias to a desperate decision. He couldn't rely on official channels. He had to operate in the shadows, risking his career, his freedom, to uncover the truth. He refocused on the location, the site, the Aegis Tower construction zone. He was convinced Hannah's body was entombed within the foundation, but he needed proof, undeniable evidence that would force the DA's hand. He needed to conduct a thorough, high-resolution, ground-penetrating radar GPR scan of the support columns. But he couldn't get a warrant. He had to find a way to access the building illegally. He needed help, someone he could trust, someone with the technical expertise to operate the GPR equipment and the willingness to bend the rules. He thought of Jarek Olis. He called Jarek and asked him to meet at a diner near his garage. He laid out the situation, the DA's refusal, the political pressure, the desperate need for proof. Jarek listened patiently, his expression growing increasingly serious. He was deeply invested in Hannah's story, sharing Elias's sense of injustice. "I'm in," Jarek said without hesitation. "Whatever it takes." Elias felt a surge of gratitude. He wasn't alone in this fight. The next challenge was acquiring the GPR equipment. It was specialized, expensive technology, not something they could rent from a hardware store. Elias pulled a favor from an old colleague in the organized crime unit, Detective Maria Sanchez. He told her he was tracking buried contraband from an old smuggling case and needed a portable GPR unit discreetly. Sanchez, trusting Elias's judgment, loaned him the equipment without asking too many questions. With the equipment secured, they needed a plan to infiltrate the Aegis Tower. The building was a fortress with state-of-the-art security, cameras, and armed guards. They studied the building's layout, the blueprints, the security protocols. They identified a vulnerability, the service entrance in the sub-basement used for maintenance and deliveries. It was less heavily guarded than the main entrances, and the security systems were older, more susceptible to bypass. They planned the infiltration for late on a Friday night, when the building was mostly empty and the security presence was reduced. They spent the next few days preparing, studying the GPR equipment, practicing the bypass techniques, finalizing the plan. The tension was high. They knew the risks. If they were caught, they would face felony charges, their careers ruined, their lives destroyed. But the thought of Hannah, entombed in the concrete, fueled their determination. They had to see this through, regardless of the cost. The night of the infiltration arrived. Elias and Jarek met near the Aegis Tower, dressed in dark clothing, the GPR equipment concealed in large duffel bags. The building loomed over them, a gleaming monument to Croft's deception. They approached the service entrance, their hearts pounding in their chests. The alleyway was dark and deserted, the silence broken only by the distant hum of the city. They reached the metal door. The lock was magnetic, connected to a security panel. Jarek went to work, his hands moving quickly, expertly, bypassing the system. After several tense minutes, the lock clicked open. They slipped inside, the door closing behind them with a soft thud. They were inside the Aegis Tower. The hunt was on. The sub-basement of the Aegis Tower was a world away from the gleaming lobby above. It was a sprawling maze of pipes, machinery, and massive concrete support columns. The air was thick with the smell of damp concrete and machine oil. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the rhythmic hum of the ventilation system. Elias and Jarek moved quickly, guided by the construction logs and the blueprints they had studied. They navigated the labyrinthine corridors, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They reached the section of the foundation poured on the night Hannah vanished. The support columns were massive, towering over them like ancient monoliths. They located the specific columns identified in the construction logs: column C4, C5, and C6. Jarek set up the GPR equipment, his movements efficient and precise. The unit was bulky, heavy, the noise of the cooling fan seeming deafening in the confined space. Elias acted as a lookout, his eyes scanning the shadows, his ears listening for any sound of approaching footsteps. They began the scan, starting with column C4. Jarek moved the antenna slowly over the surface of the concrete, his eyes fixed on the GPR screen. The screen displayed a cross-section of the column, a chaotic pattern of lines and colors representing the concrete matrix and the steel rebar. The scan took nearly an hour. They worked meticulously, covering every inch of the column. The results were negative, nothing but solid concrete and rebar. They moved to column C5. The tension mounted. If they didn't find anything here, the entire operation would be a failure. They repeated the process, the GPR antenna moving slowly over the concrete. The screen remained unchanged, a monotonous pattern of gray and black. Elias felt a growing sense of dread. Had he been wrong? Had he risked everything on a hunch? They were halfway through the scan of column C5 when they heard it, the sound of footsteps on the level above them. They froze, their hearts pounding in their chests. They quickly shut down the GPR unit, the sudden silence amplifying the sound of the approaching footsteps. They hid in the shadows behind a large generator, their breath held tight in their lungs. The footsteps grew louder, closer. A security guard doing his rounds. They waited, motionless as the guard passed by, his flashlight beam sweeping across the corridor. The guard paused, looking around, then continued on his way, the footsteps fading into the distance. They waited for several minutes until the silence returned. They emerged from their hiding spot, their nerves frayed. "That was close," Jarek whispered, his voice shaking slightly. "Let's finish this," Elias said, his resolve hardened. They resumed the scan of column C5. They reached the end of the column. Nothing. They moved to the final column, column C6. This was their last chance. They started the scan, the GPR antenna moving over the concrete. The screen remained unchanged. Elias felt a wave of despair washing over him. He had failed. And then, suddenly, the screen lit up. A large, distinct shape appeared in the center of the column, inconsistent with the surrounding material. It was roughly the size and shape of a human body. Elias and Yarrick stared at the screen, the horrific reality settling in. Hannah was inside the column. The image on the GPR screen was undeniable. A clear anomaly, a distinct shape, entombed deep within the concrete. Hana Sasaki. Elias felt a wave of nausea washing over him. The confirmation of his suspicion was both a triumph and a horror. He had found her, but the realization of her fate, the cold brutality of her burial, was devastating. He quickly photographed the GPR screen, capturing the image, the coordinates, the undeniable proof. They packed up the GPR unit quickly, their movements hurried, fueled by adrenaline and fear. They had the evidence. Now they needed to escape the fortress they had infiltrated. They moved toward the stairwell, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They reached the door, Yarrick reaching for the handle. Suddenly, the door burst open, flooding the stairwell with light. 2 armed security officers stood in the doorway, their weapons drawn, their faces set in hard lines. "Freeze!" one of them shouted, his voice echoing in the confined space. Elias and Yarrick froze, raising their hands slowly. They were caught. The security officers were professionals, private contractors hired by Croft's firm. They were alert, aggressive, clearly alerted by a silent alarm Yarrick hadn't fully disabled, or the patrol they had narrowly avoided earlier. "Who are you?" "What are you doing here?" the lead officer demanded, advancing toward them. Elias's mind raced, calculating the options. They couldn't fight their way out. They couldn't surrender the GPR unit, the evidence they had risked everything for. He had to bluff. He had to use his years of experience, his authority, to take control of the situation. He lowered his hands slightly, adopting a posture of calm authority. "Detective Elias Vance, Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation," he announced, his voice firm and steady. He pulled out his badge, holding it up for the officers to see. The officers hesitated, surprised by the assertion of authority. They lowered their weapons slightly, but remained wary. "BCI?" the lead officer asked, skepticism evident in his voice. "What is BCI doing here in the middle of the night, without authorization?" "We are investigating an anonymous tip," Elias said, the lie coming easily, smoothly. "A credible tip regarding a critical structural fault in the foundation of this building, related to the original construction." He gestured toward the GPR unit in Yarrick's backpack. "We needed to verify the information discreetly, without causing a public panic." The officers exchanged uncertain glances. The mention of a structural fault, the potential liability, had shifted the dynamic. "A structural fault?" the second officer asked, his tone less aggressive now. "Yes," Elias said, pressing the advantage. He pulled the GPR unit from the backpack, switching it on. He brought up the image of the anomaly in column C6. "Look at this," he said, showing the screen to the officers. "A dangerous void. Evidence of severe contractor negligence during the original foundation pour. The integrity of the entire column is compromised." He interpreted the anomaly, the body, as a flaw in the concrete, a technical problem that fell within their purview. The bluff worked. The security officers were not engineers. They were trained to protect the building from intruders, not to assess its structural integrity. The fear of liability, the potential disaster of a skyscraper collapse, overshadowed their suspicion. "We need to report this immediately," Elias said, his tone urgent. "We need to secure the area and notify the building management." The officers nodded, their expressions now concerned. They allowed Elias and Yarrick to pass, escorting them toward the security office. "We still need to file an incident report," the lead officer insisted, trying to regain some control of the situation. "Of course," Elias agreed, relief washing over him. They were out. They had the evidence. As they walked toward the security office, Elias knew the clock was ticking. The incident report would reach Croft quickly. He had to move fast. Elias didn't return to the BCI headquarters. He knew the security report from the Aegis Tower would trigger an immediate response from Croft's lawyers, and the politically compromised police command structure would shut him down. He had to bypass the local authorities to take the evidence directly to someone who had the power and the independence to act. He drove straight to the Ohio State Attorney General's office. It was early Saturday morning, the building quiet, deserted. He called the AG's emergency contact number, invoking his BCI credentials and the urgency of the situation. He was granted access, escorted to a conference room where the Attorney General, Eleanor Vance, no relation, met him. She was a formidable woman, known for her integrity and her willingness to take on powerful interests. Elias laid out the case, presenting the evidence meticulously, compellingly. The discovery of the car, the calculated concealment, the hidden blueprints, the expert confirmation of the stolen designs, the massive fraud that built Croft's empire. The motive, powerful and undeniable. The handwritten note, Hannah's final words. The recanted alibi, the concrete dust on Croft's clothes. And finally, the GPR scan of the Aegis Tower Foundation. The anomaly in column C6. The proof that Hana Sasaki was entombed within the concrete. The Attorney General listened, her expression growing increasingly grave. She examined the GPR images, the photographs of the blueprints, the transcripts of the interviews. The evidence was overwhelming. The magnitude of the crime, the depth of the betrayal, the potential corruption involved, it was staggering. "This is monstrous," she whispered, looking at the GPR image of the anomaly. "Julian Croft has been protected by his influence and his wealth for 11 years, Elias said, his voice tight with emotion. "He stole her genius, he killed her to cover it up, and he built a monument to his betrayal on her grave." The Attorney General looked at him, her eyes clear and resolute. "Not anymore," she said. She immediately mobilized her team, authorizing warrants for the search and excavation of the Aegis Tower Foundation and the arrest of Julian Croft. She recognized the complexity of the extraction, the need to preserve the structural integrity of the building. She coordinated with a specialized engineering team, experts in forensic excavation. The endgame had begun. Elias felt a sense of relief, a release of the tension that had coiled within him for weeks. He had done it. He had broken through the wall of silence. Now it was time to bring Hana home. The scene at the Aegis Tower was chaotic. The area around the building was cordoned off, police cruisers and engineering trucks blocking the street. The media had descended on the scene, alerted by the unprecedented police activity at one of the city's most iconic landmarks. Elias watched as the engineering team prepared for the extraction. The sub-basement was brightly lit, the silence broken by the roar of generators and the grinding of specialized cutting equipment. The extraction was a delicate operation, requiring precision and expertise. The engineers had to cut into the massive support column without compromising the structural integrity of the skyscraper above them. They worked slowly, meticulously, reinforcing the column with steel braces as they excavated the concrete. The media frenzy intensified. Julian Croft held an impromptu press conference outside his lavish penthouse apartment, his expression indignant, his voice filled with righteous anger. "These allegations are ludicrous," he declared, surrounded by his high-powered lawyers. "This is a witch hunt, a personal vendetta by a rogue detective trying to make a name for himself before he retires." He denied any involvement in Hana Sasaki's disappearance, dismissing the evidence as fabrication and conspiracy. He was confident, arrogant, unaware of the GPR scan, the undeniable proof hidden within the concrete. The extraction process took 3 days. The tension mounted with every hour, the anticipation growing heavy. Elias remained at the scene, a silent observer, waiting for the final confirmation. Finally, on the 3rd day, the engineers reached the anomaly. They carefully chipped away the concrete, revealing the remains entombed within. A silence fell over the sub-basement as the forensic team moved in. The remains were skeletal, fragile, preserved within the concrete tomb. Elias watched as they carefully extracted the remains, the sight hitting him with a wave of sadness and relief. It was over. 11 years of mystery, of uncertainty, finally resolved. The forensic analysis confirmed the identity quickly. Dental records matched. Hana Sasaki. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the head. She was killed before being placed in the wet foundation. The news broke, spreading like wildfire. The city was stunned, the architectural world shaken by the revelation. The celebrated starchitect, the philanthropist, the mentor, a murderer. Elias stood in the sub-basement, looking at the gaping hole in column C6. The foundation of Croft's empire, built on a lie and a murder, had finally crumbled. The arrest of Julian Croft was executed with the same dramatic flair that characterized his life. He was attending a black-tie gala, a celebration of his lifetime achievement in architecture. The irony was palpable. Elias led the arrest team, a squad of state troopers, into the grand ballroom where the gala was being held. The room was filled with the city's elite, the wealthy and powerful, gathered to honor the men who had shaped the skyline. Croft was on stage, accepting the award, basking in the applause. He was the epitome of success, charismatic and confident. Elias walked toward the stage, the troopers fanning out behind him. The music stopped, the applause faded, the room falling silent. Croft saw him approaching, his smile faltering, his eyes widening in disbelief. "Julian Croft," Elias said, his voice ringing through the silent room. "You are under arrest for the murder of Hana Sasaki." The silence was absolute, the shock reverberating through the crowd. Croft stared at him, his face pale, his hands gripping the podium. He didn't resist. The fight had gone out of him. The realization of his downfall, the exposure of his crimes, had shattered his arrogance. He was handcuffed and led out of the ballroom, the cameras flashing, capturing the moment of his disgrace. Elias watched him go, a sense of grim satisfaction settling over him. The giant had fallen. The monster behind the mask had been exposed. He looked around the ballroom, the opulent surroundings a testament to the wealth and influence Croft had accumulated. It was all built on a lie that had cost a young woman her life. He walked out of the ballroom, the weight of the case finally lifting from his shoulders. The standoff was over. Justice had prevailed. The trial of Julian Croft was a media sensation. The details of the case, the stolen genius, the hidden car, the entombed body, captivated the public imagination. The prosecution presented a devastating case, the evidence overwhelming, the narrative compelling. Dr. Eris Thorne testified about the plagiarism, the theft of Hana's designs. Clarissa testified about the broken alibi, the concrete dust on Croft's clothes. Jarek Olis testified about the discovery of the car and the blueprints. And Elias testified about the investigation, the 11-year hunt for the truth, the discovery of the GPR scan, the extraction of the remains. The defense tried to portray Croft as a victim, a misunderstood genius targeted by a vengeful detective. But their arguments were weak, their defense crumbling under the weight of the evidence. The jury deliberated for less than a day. The verdict: guilty of first-degree murder and massive fraud. Julian Croft was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The fallout was massive. The architectural world was shaken by the scandal. Croft's name was stripped from buildings, his awards revoked, his legacy destroyed. The Aegis Tower was renamed the Hana Sasaki Memorial Building. Hana received posthumous recognition for her groundbreaking designs, her genius finally acknowledged, celebrated. The endgame was complete. The case was closed. The conclusion of the trial brought a sense of closure, but the emotional weight of the case lingered. Elias felt a profound sense of relief, but also a deep sadness for the life that was lost, the future that was stolen. He traveled to visit Hana's elderly parents. They still lived in the small house where she grew up, their lives frozen in time, suspended in grief. He sat with them in their living room, the silence heavy with unspoken words. He told them the truth, the full story of what happened to their daughter. It was a heartbreaking conversation, filled with tears and sorrow, but also a sense of peace. They finally had the answers they had waited for 11 years. "Thank you, Detective," Hannah's mother whispered, her voice trembling. "Thank you for bringing our daughter home." Elias returned to Columbus, the weight of the past finally lifting from his shoulders. He met Jarek Olis at his garage. The young mechanic had become a local celebrity, his expertise and courage instrumental in solving the case. Elias arranged for the turquoise Beetle to be released from evidence to Jarek. "What are you going to do with it?" Elias asked. Jarek looked at the car, his expression thoughtful. "I'm going to restore it. Meticulously. Not for profit, but as a memorial to Hannah. A reminder of her brilliance." Elias nodded, a sense of respect settling over him. "That's a fitting tribute." He returned to BCY headquarters and processed his retirement paperwork. His career was over. He had faced the ghost that haunted him and finally brought justice for Hannah. He felt a sense of peace, a sense of purpose fulfilled. The foundation of Croft's empire had crumbled, revealing the truth hidden beneath. The final weeks of Elias's career were a blur of paperwork, farewell handshakes, and the quiet dismantling of a life built over 30 years. The resolution of the Sasaki case had brought him a notoriety he never sought, but it also provided the closure he desperately needed. He was leaving the Bureau not out of exhaustion, as he had anticipated, but with a sense of completion. He spent time mentoring the younger detectives in the cold case unit, passing on the lessons learned from the long, arduous investigation. He emphasized the importance of patience, intuition, and the willingness to look beyond the obvious, to challenge the established narratives. Jarek Olis became a regular presence in his life, the shared experience of the investigation forging a unique bond between the seasoned detective and the young mechanic. Jarek's garage, Olis Vintage, experienced a resurgence of business, the publicity surrounding the case bringing in new clients and opportunities. The turquoise Beetle became the centerpiece of the garage, a poignant reminder of the tragedy that had brought them together. Jarek meticulously restored the car, bringing it back to its original glory, the turquoise paint gleaming under the lights. Elias often visited the garage, sitting in a worn armchair, watching Jarek work. They talked about cars, life, and the strange twists of fate that had intertwined their lives with Hannah Sasaki's. One evening, as Jarek was closing up the garage, he turned to Elias. "What now, Detective?" Elias smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "Just Elias now, and I don't know, maybe some fishing, maybe some traveling, maybe nothing at all." He looked at the Beetle, the turquoise paint glowing softly in the dim light. "But I know one thing. I won't forget her." "Neither will I," Jarek said, his voice hushed. They stood in silence for a moment, the shared memory hanging in the air. Elias realized that his retirement wasn't an ending, but a new beginning. A chance to live a life free from the shadows of the past, guided by the lessons learned from the ghosts he had chased. He had found his purpose not in the accolades or the recognition, but in the quiet satisfaction of bringing justice to the forgotten, of giving voice to the silenced. The aftermath of the Julian Croft trial reverberated through the architectural world for years. The scandal prompted a re-examination of the ethics of the profession, the dynamics of mentorship, and the protection of intellectual property. Hannah Sasaki became a symbol of stolen genius, her story a cautionary tale about the dangers of ambition and the corrosive nature of power. Her designs were studied in universities, celebrated for their innovation and brilliance. The Hannah Sasaki Memorial Building became a pilgrimage site for architects and students, a reminder of the legacy that had almost been erased. Julian Croft spent the rest of his life in a maximum security prison, his name synonymous with fraud and murder. He died alone, forgotten, his empire reduced to dust. Elias Vance embraced his retirement, finding peace in the quiet rhythms of everyday life. He traveled, reconnected with old friends, and discovered a passion for woodworking. He often visited the Hana Sasaki Memorial Building, standing in the lobby, looking up at the soaring atrium, the twisting structure that defied gravity. He saw not a monument of steel and glass, but a testament to the enduring power of truth. One afternoon, as he stood in the lobby, a young architecture student approached him. She recognized him from the news reports. "Detective Vance?" she asked hesitantly. "Just Elias," he corrected her gently. "I just wanted to thank you," she said, her eyes shining with admiration, "for what you did for Hana, for what you did for all of us." Elias smiled, a bittersweet smile. "It wasn't me. It was her brilliance, her courage. I just helped the world see it." He looked up at the building, the sunlight streaming through the glass ceiling, illuminating the space with a warm, golden light. He felt a profound sense of peace. The foundation of silence had been broken. The truth had prevailed. And Hana Sasaki's legacy was finally secured, etched in the skyline, a beacon of hope for the future.